Liverpool is famous for several reasons. The Beatles, its links with the Titanic through the White Star Line, its impressive football team, and its national dish of chicken with a can of Coke. But those interested in the paranormal may have heard whispers about the ghosts haunting an old asylum known as the Newsham Park Hospital. I'm Bleaki, and today I will tell you about the history, horror and the real-life ghost stories of the Newsham Park Hospital, an orphanage and later asylum that is said to still hold the disembodied spirits of a crying boy, the overbearing spirit of a nurse, a frightening ex-psychiatric patient, and one of the best ghost photographs ever captured.
They're coming to take me away, ha-ha. They're coming to take me away, ho-ho, hee-hee, ha-ha. To the funny farm where life is beautiful all the time. And I'll be happy to see those nice young men in their clean white coats.
So last weekend I arranged the stag do or bachelor party for one of my best friends in Liverpool. If you think some of the real ghost stories I tell here are scary, this stag do would have you in therapy. While good times are had all around, I couldn't help but drunkenly ask people about any local haunted places that they might know in the area. One such story shared with me was that of Newsham Park Hospital. Intrigued when I got home, I began researching this fascinating place, and the accounts I read truly chilled me. Newsham Park Hospital, nestled in Liverpool's iconic Newsham Park, has a long and colourful history that takes us back to the mid-19th century. Originally, it wasn't even a hospital. The grand old building started its life in 1874 as the Liverpool Seamen's Orphan Institution, built to house the children of mariners who had been lost at sea. The structure was designed by the architect Alfred Waterhouse, known for his work on the National History Museum in London, so you can see why the hospital has an imposing Gothic style with turrets and a domineering facade. The orphanage was established by a local philanthropist named William Rathbone, a figure whose compassion was as famous as his influence in Liverpool. Rathbone couldn't ignore the devastating impact of losing a family breadwinner from sailor families, so he decided to start the Liverpool Seamen's Orphanage Institution, which was to provide shelter, education and stability for these children void of a fatherly role model. The building, when it first opened, accommodated up to 300 children and wasn't just about offering a roof over their heads. It was equipped with spacious dormitories, classrooms and play areas designed to nurture young minds and help them grow up with skills and knowledge that would help them in life. There was also a chapel inside, complete with stained glass windows and carved wooden pews where children attended regular services and Sunday school. It was a strict yet caring environment, reflecting the Victorian values of the time where order, morality and religious devotion went hand in hand. During World War I, the widespread devastation left thousands of children without support, many of whom ended up being moved to Newsham Park as a refuge. In 1921, a visit from Queen Mary and King George V resulted in the orphanage receiving a Royal Charter of Incorporation, a significant honour at the time which increased funding which was desperately needed. During this time, life at the orphanage was far from easy. Former residents of the time told of a strict environment overseen by stern matrons who maintained order through harsh discipline, with punishments that were often severe. By the end of World War II, improvements in the country's social care system meant fewer children needed the institution's support, leading to a decline in both its population and its funding. By the late 1940s, the institution was starting to outlive its original purpose. The number of orphans had declined significantly due to the changes in the social services and welfare systems. As a result, the orphanage was closed on the 27th of July 1949. Rather than letting the building fall into disuse and disrepair, it was later used as a military hospital and a general hospital before becoming a psychiatric unit in 1954. The hospital era saw the transformation of the building's interior to accommodate wards, treatment rooms and consultation spaces. Gone were the dormitories filled with children. The innocent giggles were replaced by blood-curdling screams of the psychiatric patients. This was an era where psychiatric care was still finding its footing. Treatments ranged from traditional therapies to more controversial practices like electroconvulsive therapy and even lobotomies, which was an awful practice that damaged the brain to turn those struggling with mental illness into empty shells. To get an idea of how this feels, you can watch Jake Paul videos for 24 hours straight. The only thing that remained the same was the eerie beauty of the architecture, hiding the sorrow and horror that the public rarely saw. By the 1970s and 1980s, Newsham Park Hospital had developed a reputation in the local community, sometimes respected, sometimes feared. For some, it was a place of healing and care, providing vital mental health services at a time when knowledge of these conditions was still developing and were widely misunderstood. For others, it was a place shrouded in stigma, viewed with suspicion and dread. Rumours of mistreatment and cruel practices ran rampant. What also scared people were stories of ghostly sightings and eerie occurrences shared by the asylum staff. The hospital's foreboding appearance and the often tragic stories of its patients only fueled the local legends further. It didn't help that parts of the building had begun to show signs of age. Long corridors, some still lined with Victorian-era wooden panelling, became flaky, dim and drafty. Windows rattled in the wind, and some rooms were permanently locked due to them being structurally unsafe. The hospital continued to operate until the late 1980s, when attitudes and treatment around mental health care changed. In 1988, they stopped taking new patients. By then, the approach to psychiatric treatment had shifted significantly, moving away from institutionalisation towards community-based care. By 1992, the hospital was closed for good. The building was brought at auction in 1997 by a developer, but their plans to create apartments was rejected, so the site went back up for sale in 2007. With its doors closed, Newsham Park Hospital was left to the elements. It stood abandoned for years, slowly decaying as vines strangled its walls and nature began reclaiming the land. The once bustling building fell silent, its empty rooms echoing only with the memories of its rich history. But the legacy of Newsham Park Hospital is far from over, and its tragic past has resurfaced. In recent years, Newsham Park Hospital has become something of a legend in Liverpool, attracting attention as one of the city's most notoriously haunted places. Paranormal enthusiasts and those taking part in paranormal investigations rush to explore its crumbling corridors and shadowy rooms, looking for signs of the former residents who were never discharged. It's no surprise that Newsham Park Hospital has earned a reputation as one of the most haunted places in the UK. The building has been featured on paranormal investigation TV shows, and it's a popular spot for ghost tours, drawing visitors and ghost hunters from all over, all hoping to experience the paranormal, and they're rarely disappointed. One of the most infamous ghosts said to roam the halls of Newsham Park Hospital is that of the crying boy. Newsham's early beginning as an orphanage is still felt today, with many visitors reporting hearing this soft, heart-wrenching sound of a child sobbing from somewhere in the hospital. The crying boy is thought to be the spirit of one of the many orphans who lived and maybe died within the building. People often describe hearing the sound of small footsteps pattering across the wooden floorboards, followed by faint sniffles and gentle sobs. Even more scary are the stories of visitors who have heard these sounds growing louder and louder, only to turn a corner to find the corridor completely empty and the sound silenced. The crying boy isn't just heard, however. Some say they've seen a small shadowy figure darting between rooms or caught a glimpse of a little boy peeking around doorways before vanishing into thin air. Those who have encountered him up close describe a sense of overwhelming sadness, as if the very air around him is heavy with sorrow. The identity of the crying boy is unclear, with no one knowing how the boy died and why he is haunting Newsham Park Hospital. Paul Stevens, a local history buff and a guy who loves partaking in paranormal investigations, first visited Newsham Park Hospital during one of its many ghost hunts back in 2014. While exploring the abandoned dormitories, which were once used to house the orphaned children, Paul felt a deep sense of sadness as he wandered past the empty rows of rusty metal bed frames. According to Paul, the air had become heavy, almost suffocating. Paul's encounter began when he decided to take a break and sat on one of the old beds. As he did so, he suddenly heard what sounded like faint sobbing echoing from the far end of the room. At first he thought it was one of his group members playing silly buggers, but as he scanned the room, he realised everyone else was on the opposite side of it, unaware of the noise. The sobbing continued, low and heart-wrenching, gradually becoming louder and more distinct. As he peered into the dimly lit corner of the dormitory where these sobs were coming from, Paul spotted a small shadowy figure crouched beside one of the beds. He described the figure as looking like a young boy, no older than 7 or 8, with his face buried in his hands. Paul described him as just sitting there, shaking and crying. Gathering his courage, Paul softly called out to the figure, but the boy didn't respond. Instead, he slowly faded away, leaving Paul staring at an empty corner. Paul later said, "I felt this overwhelming sense of loss, like whatever he was crying about was something he could never forget or let go of." Sarah Townsend, a visitor who took part in an organised ghost hunt in July 2015, also had a run-in with the crying boy. While wandering for the old dormitory area where the orphan children would sleep, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. The atmosphere was heavy and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As the group paused for a moment of silence to conduct an EVP session, Sarah distinctly heard the sound of small, shuffling footsteps coming from behind the row of metal beds. When she turned around, she saw the figure of a small boy dressed in old-fashioned clothing standing by one of the beds. She said she could see him staring at her, but before she could call out to the others, he vanished. Just like Paul, Sarah was left with a horrible feeling of sadness and speculated that the boy must have been one of the orphan children, eternally looking for someone to comfort him. The Naughty Boys Corner is one of the most sinister areas of the hospital. This small, narrow passage was used as a place of punishment where misbehaving boys were locked away in solitary confinement. Many visitors claim to feel a sense of dread when passing through, and some have heard the disembodied cries and screams of children. Several paranormal enthusiasts have heard whimpering coming from this area. One particularly scary account happened in April 2010 when a paranormal investigations team decided to spend the night in the hospital to document any supernatural occurrences. Around 2 AM, when one of the members of the team, John, was alone in the Naughty Boys corridor, setting up a camera to capture any activity, he heard what sounded like a faint cry coming from behind him. He described it as a whimper that grew louder. When he turned around, he saw the image of a girl, no older than 8, standing at the end of the corridor. She was wearing a tattered white dress, her face streaked with what looked like tears. The investigator froze, unable to speak. Suddenly, the girl let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound so loud and piercing that it echoed throughout the entire corridor. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she vanished into thin air. When John reviewed the footage later, the camera had captured a dark shadow darting across the hallway at the exact moment he saw the girl, but no clear image of her form. He said, "I've been to dozens of haunted places, but I've never heard a scream like that before. It was pure fear." But it's not just the spirits of the crying boy or the screaming girl that still linger in the place they once called home. One of the most active spots in the entire building is the main staircase, where the spirits of both children and adults have been seen. The staircase, with its ornate railings and wide steps, is a focal point of the building, and it seems to draw all kinds of paranormal activity. People report feeling small invisible hands brushing against them as they climb the stairs, hearing whispers in their ears, or even catching glimpses of children standing at the top or bottom of the steps, watching them intently. But people don't always find these accounts scary, with some people describing the sensation of being gently pushed or nudged as if the spirits are trying to guide them forward or warn them to turn back. Nope. I've seen way too many horror movies to let a ghost guide me somewhere. That's a one-way ticket to bad times. There are also reports of more playful spirits, particularly in the old staff quarters. People have encountered the ghost of a mischievous child, sometimes nicknamed Little Tommy, who likes to play pranks on unsuspecting visitors. Doors will slam shut, lights will flicker on and off, and objects will be moved or hidden, only to reappear in the most unlikely places. I think I might be haunted by a similar ghost. It would explain why I'm always losing my keys, and that's my explanation, and I'm sticking with it. Those who've encountered little Tommy say that while his antics can be unnerving, they're not malicious, more like the playful tricks of a child trying to get attention. Another mischievous child at Newsham Park was sighted by Paul Griffiths, who decided to brave the haunted corridors of Newsham Park Hospital with a few friends during an organised ghost hunt. Paul, also known for his skepticism, had always been fascinated by ghost stories but had never personally experienced anything. But that all changed. While exploring the old children's ward, Paul and his friends heard the unmistakable sound of children's laughter echoing down the long, empty hallway. At first, they assumed it must be a recording, a trick set up by the tour organisers to spook them. But as they moved further into the ward, they noticed something that chilled them. The laughter was following them. Determined to debunk it, Paul and his friends stood still, trying to locate the source of the sound. They joked among themselves that there must have been moving speakers somewhere, but as they did, Paul caught a glimpse of a movement at the corner of his eye. Turning quickly, he saw what looked like a small child dressed in old-fashioned clothes, peering at them from behind a door frame. But when he stepped forward, the child vanished. Shaken, Paul admitted that the experience changed his perspective on the supernatural. He said, "I came here thinking it was all fun and games, but when I saw her, I knew there's something real in this place." I mean, it does sound like it's all fun and games, but for the mischievous children trying to scare the crap out of people, when it's my time to go, Halloween for my family will be legendary. Another apparition haunting the hospital is known as the White Lady. This spectral figure is said to glide silently through the building, dressed in a flowing white gown that seems to shimmer behind her. The White Lady's identity is also shrouded in mystery, but there are theories that she might have been a nurse or a matron during the hospital's time as an asylum. Some believe she's still watching over the patients, making her rounds even in the afterlife. Witnesses often report seeing her in old wards and treatment rooms, where she's sometimes seen standing at the end of a corridor, her face hidden in shadow, before disappearing when people walk closer to her. The White Lady's appearance is often accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature and a strong sense of being watched. People who have come face to face with her describe an intense feeling of discomfort and even intimidation. She's not known to be particularly malevolent, but more of a silent watcher, but that's arguably as worse as a toucher. That's why some cats just freak me out. What are they planning? Not all the ghosts are intimidating here, however, with a few visitors reportedly seeing the ghost of a kind elderly woman who appears in the old chapel. Known affectionately as Mother Mary by those who have encountered her, she's thought to have been a nurse or caretaker who worked at the hospital in its early days. One visitor, Emma Sullivan, shared her story. When sitting quietly in the chapel during a tour, trying to soak in the atmosphere, she noticed an old woman sitting a few pews away. Looking over, Emma saw her smiling at her. What struck her as odd was that she looked so out of place, wearing a long old-fashioned dress, like something out of the 19th century. Emma glanced away for a moment, and when she looked back, the woman had vanished. She said there was no sound, no movement, she was just gone. Emma later learned from the tour guide that there have been several reports of a kind-looking woman appearing in the chapel, often when visitors are feeling particularly distressed or anxious. This seemed to ring true, as Emma said she didn't feel scared and that it was more like she was there to comfort her, to make sure she was okay. But Mother Mary isn't the only spirit enjoying the solace of the chapel. Alan King, a retired electrician and part-time medium, visited Newsham Park Hospital out of curiosity, drawn by its ghostly reputation. He claims he just wanted the place to himself and wasn't looking for ghosts. But come on, Alan, you don't go to McDonald's for a salad and water. While exploring the old chapel, Alan sat down on one of the pews, taking in the atmosphere. Suddenly, he felt the temperature drop and a peculiar sensation of being watched. He said that when he looked to his right, he saw an older gentleman sitting by him. He said he looked like an old-fashioned doctor with round glasses and a white coat. The man smiled and nodded at Alan. This is such a British guy thing to do. No matter where you are in the country, when passing another man, it's compulsory to give a half smile and a nod. And if it's raining, one of you has to comment on the weather. It's like a law. Alan said that while the two didn't speak, he could hear him in his head. The ghost apparently told him that his name was Dr. Gray and that he used to work here when he was still in Asylum. While Alan wanted to speak back, within a blink of the eye, the phantom doctor vanished, disappearing before you could ask any questions. He was definitely a doctor. Is this the spirit of a long-gone doctor looking for spiritual guidance? Darker and far more unsettling than the White Lady is an entity simply known as the Shadow Man. This spirit is said to lurk in the basement and lower levels of the building. Described as a tall, pitch-black silhouette with no noticeable features, he's been spotted lurking in the shadows, watching visitors. People who have encountered him speak of an overwhelming sense of dread, like they're in the presence of something truly evil. Some say the Shadow Man is drawn to negative energy, feeding off their anxiety or anger. Let's hope the Shadow Man doesn't discover Twitter. That would turn him supernova. He's been known to follow people, appearing suddenly at the end of a hallway or even looming in doorways as if challenging people to come closer. Some people who have been unfortunate enough to come in contact with this entity have reported being pushed, pulled and scratched, experiences that have undoubtedly left them shaken. Most paranormal investigators and enthusiasts believe that this is the spirit of a particularly troubled former patient, an angry residual energy left behind from the hospital's darker days as an asylum. Others claim that he may even be an entity that has never lived on the earth, and something more demonic. In June 2017, Lisa Bradshaw decided to join one of the public ghost hunts with her friends. She wasn't expecting much as a complete skeptic to the paranormal. She thought she would be able to debunk the activity. You know, expanding floorboards making knocks, or wind blowing through window gaps that could sound like faint whispers. But what she experienced changed her outlook on the paranormal forever. While exploring the basement, Lisa felt an icy touch brush against her arm. She turned, expecting to see one of her friends, but nobody was there. As she continued to walk, she noticed a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room, partially hidden in the darkness. She could see the figure was incredibly tall. In fact, it was incredibly elongated. Lisa thought it must have been a trick of the light, with the moonlight hitting something and causing a shadow. But the figure then stepped forward. Lisa was paralysed in fear. She described the figure as having no face, just a dark mass where his face should have been. Interestingly, she described the air around it as rippling, like heat waves on a road in the summer. Lisa wanted to run away, but she was so scared she couldn't move. The shadow moved closer to Lisa, like it was homing in on its prey, before vanishing into thin air. After that, Lisa burst into a sprint and returned to her friends. After reciting the story and seeing how terrified the woman was, the group left and never returned to Newsham Park Hospital again. Another chilling encounter that's frequently reported is the presence of ghostly nurses. These spirits are often seen wandering the old wards, dressed in the uniforms of a bygone era, their faces expressionless and their footsteps eerily silent. It seems that they are caught in some sort of eternal loop, performing the same duties over and over again, as if still tending to the patients who once filled the beds. People who have seen them describe a sense of deep sadness, as if these nurses are forever trapped in their roles, unable to move on even though the hospital has been empty for decades. Julie Dawson, a former nurse herself, visited Newsham Park Hospital in 2016 as part of a charity event. She had heard the stories of the previously mentioned White Lady, the ghostly apparition believed to be a nurse who once cared for the patients in the hospital's psychiatric wards. During the tour, Julie felt a strange connection to the place, as if she could sense the lingering presence of those who once worked there. Maybe she was more connected as they both had once shared the same profession. As Julie and her group moved through the empty ward, she felt a sudden chill in the air. The temperature seemed to drop sharply, and an uneasy stillness fell over the room. Out of the corner of her eye, Julie saw a flash of white. Turning her head, she saw a woman standing near the far end of the ward, dressed in a crisp, white nurse's gown. The woman's figure was clear and distinct, but her face was shadowed, making it impossible to see her facial features. At first, Julie and her friends thought she was a reenactor used on the tour, but she noticed how still she was and how she didn't look completely solid. The woman began to walk slowly down the ward. Julie said that she didn't feel scared and was compelled to follow the figure to see where she was going. The group watched in stunned silence as the figure moved gracefully down the hallway, then turned a corner. When Julie reached the corner, there was no sign of her. When later sharing her story, she said, "I know what I saw. She was real, but not real at the same time. It's hard to explain. I felt this incredible sense of calm, like she was still there, watching over the place." Julie believed that the woman she saw was one of the nurses who once worked here, or even the white lady herself, still caring for the vulnerable patients in death. Just before the hospital was permanently closed and left to decay, a nurse named Linda Matthews was working the night shift in one of the psychiatric wards. The ward had been unusually quiet and most of the patients were asleep. Around midnight, Linda noticed a shadowy figure moving in the hallway outside the ward. Thinking it was one of the patients wandering around, she stepped out to investigate. To her surprise, the hallway was empty. As she turned back towards the ward, however, she caught sight of a woman dressed in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform standing at the far end of the corridor. The woman seemed to be watching her, her face obscured in shadow. Linda, startled, called out, "Who's there?" But the figure didn't move. Instead, it slowly faded into the darkness. Linda wasn't the only ex-staff member of the hospital that experienced this, however. Several staff members over the years have reported seeing the same apparition, a nurse in a white gown who silently wanders the halls. Some believe she could have been the nurse for the orphanage back in the 19th century, while others think she may have been from the early days of the asylum. Back in 2017, a paranormal group called Haunted Happenings spent the night at Newsham Park Hospital, after which they decided to take a group photograph. When looking back at it after being posted on Facebook, however, they noticed a face that no one in the group recognised. Is this smiling spectre the spirit of a long-gone nurse happy to be part of a large team again? Or maybe she was one of the many patients treated here? Newsham Park Hospital is one of those places that has a very long list of ghosts, far too many to cover in this video. With several recorded deaths on the premises, including several drownings in the lake, people who unalived themselves, and patients that died of different causes, it seems to be one of those places that just attracts spirits. Obviously, with it now being a hotspot for paranormal investigations, you don't know how many of the ghost stories are exaggerated or made up to keep people coming back. Other ghosts here include the spirit of a nurse who is said to have hung herself after being accused of killing a patient, a headless man in a white coat, an orphan child called Bill who was said to have died after being left in a cupboard by a cruel matron, and the spirit of a man called Stephen who died at Newsham Park at the age of 27 in 1920 of an illness of the lungs. In fact, some say that they can still hear the wheezing coughs echoing through the halls. Let's just be grateful he didn't die from a condition that irritated his bowels, else people wouldn't be able to take the haunting sounds very seriously. Despite its growing fame in the ghost hunting community, Newsham Park Hospital's future is uncertain. The building, once a symbol of care and refuge, and also forsaken for mistreatment and sorrow that seeped into its walls, it now stands mostly abandoned and decaying. Various redevelopment plans have been suggested over the years, ranging from housing projects to converting it into a hotel, but none have fully come to fruition. You just wait until Weatherspoons notices this place. The woman in white will be chowing down on the Thursday Curry Club in no time. Whether you see it as a place of historical importance, a decaying old building, or one of the UK's most haunted places, Newsham Park Hospital has undeniably left its mark in Liverpool's legacy. In a strange way, its rich and often troubling history is still kept alive today through the ghost stories. Whether the mischievous or saddened souls of the children still linger, people still talk about how it became a refuge for orphans. Whether the Shadow Man is really the disembodied spirit of a mentally ill patient, investigators still talk about the troubling psychiatric treatment during a time when mental health wasn't understood. And the woman in white and the other nurses still wandering the corridors, refusing to end their shift, show that there were some people who genuinely cared for the people who lived and may even remain here. So, is the Newsham Park Hospital haunted? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button, as a small channel that really helps me grow and allows me to release more content more often. I really appreciate you all, and until next time, sleep well, friends.
She